Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
This ain't no one-way ticket. Welcome to the thicket of brainwaves and epiphanies, grown men crying and matriarchs winning. Join this fight to protect your kin, your knaves, strong and weak, especially the vulnerable. Multi-hazards is in the house. I ain't here to give you a run-around bull. Join us, friends, sign up to battle. Climate change, human rage, all the sheep and all the cattle. Playing games while nature flames, floods and blows with all the cracks and hacks and terror foes. We're here to win. Hi, everybody. This is Multi-Hazards, the podcast where we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change, adaptation, security, and so many other topics. And the overarching goal that we have here at the podcast is what? Protection. Protecting communities. That means you. So welcome, Vin Nelson here, and today I am so thrilled to have a special guest all the way from the other side of Canada, in Ontario actually, and his name is Fire Chief Wilbert Wesley. So he is the Fire Chief at Matagami First Nation. So I had to practice to say that. He has invested 17 years in emergency management and along with 20 years in the fire services and the last 14 years as a disaster management educator. He's very passionate when it comes to education and training, as well as improving the well-being of community members whom he works with. And he is committed to the safety of those communities that are around him when it comes to emergency services / management / fire services. So, Fire Chief Wilbert Wesley states on his LinkedIn profile that it's been an honor and privilege to serve and to be of service. So, dear listeners, it's my custom each and every time here at the Multi-Hazards podcast to pronounce a territorial acknowledgement out of deep respect for First Nations people around me here in the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So, this text I use is from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is here where I live. And here we go. We work, study, and live in a region south of Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Quiquetlam peoples. These are the names of various First Nations groups around me here in Greater Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. So welcome everybody to Multi-Hazards podcast, and I am very thrilled to have Fire Chief Wilbert Wesley here, and I met him about, the end or around the beginning of November in 2018 at an emergency management conference in Vancouver, BC on the west coast of Canada. And I believe that Fire Chief Wilbert Wesley is all the way over in Ontario, just below the city or town of Timmins, and then up above, Sudbury. So hi, how are you doing, Wilbert?
Very good, Wachier and bonjour.
Okay, that's right, Wachier. That's then now I know the sort of the old word is Ojibwe, but the new is Anish. Oh, it's hard, so long for me. Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe. Okay, because over here in Vancouver, the First Nations language is called Halkomelem, so just 100% different. So, how you doing over there? And I know you're so busy, right?
My plate has been very full in the last 5 to 6 months. But we have a great emergency management team and a fantastic control group team, and it really makes our tasks a lot more easier when you have organization during this time of the pandemic, the global pandemic, right?
Right, exactly. Now, I'm just wondering, I couldn't tell from your LinkedIn profile how long you've been in emergency management, but I'm wondering, how did you get into this field?
Well, after my military days, I came back, and it was during that time that the economy downturn happened. Everybody had to get re-educated and find different jobs. By that point, I had just started dabbling into the volunteer fire department. And then a couple of years later, my former fire chief took notice of, I guess, what we call potential, and kept nagging me for the next couple of years I served on his department to take the exam and go to fire college. So after being nagged over a couple of years, he had me write the fire college exam just to see what the marks would be like. And he came back to me and says, you really need to go back to fire college. You really need to do this full time. I didn't take it to heart at the time, but he was a good mentor to me back in the early 90s. And sure enough, one day I took it to heart, and I ended up going to fire college and then over to Newfoundland, gaining life experiences. And that's where I started getting involved in emergency management because of the relocation of the community of Davis Inlet to Natwashish. So that was really one of my major experiences in emergency management and the logistics involved in such operations. From there, I noticed I took a liking to it, and unknowingly taking NFPA courses, the National Fire Protection Agency courses and emergency response training courses, didn't know I was even grooming myself for something in the future when I moved back here to Ontario. So it's been 20 plus years working in fire and emergency services and emergency management within the last 15. So it's snowball effect, especially being Indigenous, Aboriginal, and laboring a labor of love and passion for the Indigenous Aboriginal communities when it comes to emergency management because of some of the gaps that are involved due to politics regarding emergency management in First Nations. So my passion is to serve the First Nations people with what skills that I've learned going away from the reserve in university and college, and being able to come back home and help not only my culturalistic people, the Swampy Cree of Attawapiskat, Saskatchewan, and Fort Albany, but also other First Nations across Ontario and in the Newfoundland, Labrador. And as you've known, now speaking in different universities and colleges and symposiums like where we met.
Right.
So it's been a true blessing, a true journey for sure, to come this far over almost close to 20 years now in this field.
Wow. Now, how do I say it? Matagami First Nation?
Yeah, it would be pronounced Matagami First Nations.
Oh, Matagami.
Matagami is located along the Matagami River. And we are now in the relocation community of Matagami from its former settlement back in the earlier days in the 1950s, I believe it was, or 40s. So this is where I transferred from Ottawa to resurrect and retrain the fire department here. But I also work with the emergency management coordinator here in Matagami First Nations. And over the past 5 some odd years, we've been developing their emergency response plan to what they have now, which is a master emergency response plan, and quickly developing its pandemic portion.
Wow. And do you have relatives in Newfoundland? Because it sounds like you have a connection there, or you just went there for a job in the beginning?
Well, actually, my sons are living in Newfoundland, Labrador. They go to college and university out there, and so that's why I tend to go out there and where they grew up in their earlier years when they were children themselves. So that's where I had a big hand in experiences in going to school and working in Newfoundland, Labrador. I was actually there for 7 years, and if there had been a permanent job, I'd move there in a heartbeat. But as time passed, destiny has its way, God has its way of changing your plans, and it brought me back. I felt a very strong conviction and a pull to come back to Ontario in the mid-2000s to come back, and I did, and this career is just snowballed to what it is now. And there's such a high demand for it. Like I said, I did not know I was being groomed in my earlier years to what I'm doing now. So it's definitely come together in a blessing kind of way. Wow.
Now, you're the fire chief and somebody else is doing emergency manager? Or you're both?
I'm actually an instructor for the province. So I'm the fire chief and the coordinator of protective services for this community because we offer more than just fire protection. But because I'm also an instructor in the province for disaster and emergency management, my student who is here in this community, who is the emergency management service coordinator appointed by the elected officials here. And I met her through one of my class sessions that we hold, regional sessions in Southern Ontario. And that's how she made me alerted to her community, the needs here, and the work that needed to be done here, both in fire services and emergency management, and to where it is to this day in 2020.
Okay. And, sorry, I'm just trying to get everything clear here. So were you brought up in Matagami First Nation, or you were brought up somewhere else?
No, I was born in Moose Factory, Ontario, and I grew up in Moosonee, Ontario. My sister and I are the daytime residential school survivors. My parents were residential school survivors. But I grew up on the reservation of Kisashawan First Nations. This is why I learned to speak my language and understand it, thanks to, in part, to my grandparents who had a hand in raising me on the reservation of Kisashawan First Nations. I'm actually an Attawapiskat band member on my grandfather's side, which is a reserve further up. It's how the band registry system works with Indigenous Aboriginal.
Okay, and that, you mean it works like that all across Canada, or just in Ontario?
Well, from what I know anyway, from my own history and from my family's history, is our registry number is Attawapiskat, our band registry. But, marriages, people move to different towns, and so that's, how that plays out.
Right. Because here where I live, there's a lot of people over the years, they would marry somebody near this Vancouver, Fraser River area and these different groups, and then they'd marry somebody way up in Thompson River, and then I guess they'd have membership in both somehow, one through their mom, one through their dad. So I was trying to figure out how it all works.
Yeah, and then I think generally here, when you do have marriages from different communities, people from different communities, when a child's born, generally I believe from the way it worked, it dominantly went under the male's name of their band registry. Hence, it would explain why my mom's band number and my band number, my siblings, are all under my grandfather's roots and lineage.
Okay.
So,
wow. Now, I looked at your LinkedIn, and it said, 3 months ago, you said, emergency social services in full swing, proof that training/education to our First Nation proves we can do this and do it right. Working with municipalities, NGO, ICS, Indigenous Services Canada, and Matagami First Nation community volunteers that have been educated regarding COVID and safety training. Okay, so efforts to help isolate and keep community members home as Chief and Council declared a state of emergency regarding COVID-19 and a proactive approach to combat the pandemic. So just wondering, now is like mid-July, and I think you wrote that in 3 months ago. I'm just wondering, what's the update now with Matagami First Nation?
Well, currently right now, because certain sectors of Ontario are starting to open up as the numbers start to decrease, we follow what media posts and release we get from our Member of Parliament, Mr. Doug Ford. But our health branch in our Matagami First Nations also get updates from Health Canada through their health services. And then, of course, our Chief and Council will get their updates from the Prime Minister when he releases them on television. So at any given time, we're always getting an inflow of information, and our trained personnel of the Community Control Group, known as the CCG, that handles the emergency in this community, we don't let the Chief and Council handle the emergency. They're busy with business continuity to make sure that the day-to-day businesses of the First Nations is still running. The Community Control Group that is assigned are managers of certain departments within this community. We get together, we make the decisions based on the media release of information regarding the pandemic. We in turn provide that information to Chief and Council. At any time they feel that some of our decisions are not correct, they can overstep and make some certain decisions. Very rarely that happens, but when it does, we do understand the reasoning behind it, provided that they are following the training and the education of how these choices are met. Now, currently, right now, we've lifted a lot of the restrictions regarding the community, especially regarding access in and out of the community. However, we still deny access to those that do not reside in Matagami. However, if you are a band member and have family members here, you are allowed in, but you do go through a screening process. And we do this for our delivery people, our working staff that are on the front lines, and our community control group teams. We provide COVID tests to ensure that those that are on the front lines are being kept safe. This reassures the community that if they can see us performing diligently, with due diligence, our roles during this pandemic phase, we calm the anxiety and the fears in the community because we've addressed those serious issues and concerns that most people tend to try to skirt and don't want to be held responsible for. But with training and education, we've learned that it's best to err on the side of caution. And so here with the training and education material that we provide to First Nations, we help them understand the reasoning behind emergency plans and how they benefit the community. At the same time, we also navigate and show them the networking of ISC, Indigenous Service Canada, and the reports they want to see and what First Nations should have concerning emergency management so that when something happens, the trickle of flow of financial help will be there, be it financial or resources. However, it does take training and education to go through that process, and Metagami First Nations has proven that in the last 5 years. They've made leaps and bounds and have access to the funding because why? They know the report writing format. They know what logs and forms that need to be filled in order to make this process possible.
Right.
So that's where we are with this community right now regarding its staff, its training, and the community as citizens that live here in Metagami. So we have a pretty good system, and as you can tell on my LinkedIn, we even have a color-coded system that we provide.
Oh, yeah.
Residents can put card on their living room window, and we drive by and we see whether they need garbage, medicine, food, or even just mental health to speak to somebody. And we provide this information on our community website, always informing the community of what's going on and clarity on the Band Council resolutions as they are either increased or lifted. So again, communication and clarity.
Right. I was listening to this podcast, and there were these two young women who are First Nations somewhere up there in the north of Ontario. They live in Toronto, and so they did this podcast. I think they were back on their it's reserve, right? That's the proper word.
Yeah.
So, and then they were joking. They were, just one second here. They were joking that the settlers, the non-Indigenous people in some of the communities, right when COVID was coming out in March, the settlers were coming up to First Nations people and saying, "Hey, we know you have a lot of experience like blocking roads. So we want to know how do you do this, right?" So these two young women, they were just kind of laughing. They're saying, "Wow, now people are coming to us, to learn how to blockade so that they don't let outsiders in to spread COVID-19. So I just thought it was...
I haven't witnessed anything grand as that, but I have been noticing a lot of social media posts on what some communities are doing to try to be proactive. Yes, some of them are very comical. I did see one on social media where it was just a cardboard box held by a stone and a stick that said, "No entry." So again, training and education makes a world of a difference when it comes to putting up things like monitoring stations and the process, right, and the people involved.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I know. Did you keep the cases low though in that part of Ontario, in that area?
In our particular community here, we have no cases, but we were very tough with the Band Council resolutions, aka bylaws, in enforcing them here. Unfortunately, not everybody likes being told when they can and cannot leave. However, when Chief and Council, the elected officials, make those decisions, they make it for the best of everybody. And that's what makes a world of difference, is because when Chief and Council can support the emergency management team of a community, it really benefits as a whole. It takes a lot of stress off Chief and Council. At the same time, it allows more logical, reasonable, and compassionate decisions to be made by the team that's trained in emergency management.
Right. Do you think that First Nations, like for example in BC, I don't know Ontario, but there was like 2 waves of smallpox. One was in the 1700s and the other one was like during, I think, the gold rush in the mid 1800s. And it just wiped out so many communities. So I was thinking, now, fast forward to 2020, is there this kind of deep cultural knowledge of history and saying, you know what, it happened twice before, we are going to protect ourselves with all our beings.
If you remember, before then we had the H1N1, the swine flu,
we
had SARS, And I'm really beginning to notice, and I'm not just talking professionally as an instructor in disaster emergency management. When I visit these communities and I teach in these First Nations communities, I walk out with a wealth of knowledge regarding their traditional medicines that they have been researching and bringing back to life and teaching the young people. Now, that's something I did not see in my earlier 10 years in disaster management. And as I crept into the 15th year and traveling and being in these different communities, it wasn't as prevalent as I do see now with this pandemic of COVID-19. Before the shutdowns and the lockdowns of highways flights, when we went through that phase, I was traveling and teaching disaster and emergency management for a corporation out of Toronto. And as I went to these communities, I know they were bringing things back like cedar teas, and dandelion teas, all these the natural maple syrup that they make in this area that have health properties. I didn't even know that. And over the last six months now, I've been educated by First Nations regarding the knowledge that they are bringing back to help combat something in this day and age, in this era that we live in. So I found that very humbling, but yet very interesting at the same time. It was just to reveal that, like an epiphany to myself, seeing that. I was like, wow, I'm still learning to this day. You know what I mean?
Because, the dominant world paradigm is for big pharmaceutical companies to have a research lab, and then they grab some stuff from the wilderness and come up with some new medicine and then charge thousands for it. And people who are sick just can't afford it. And then here people are in the little nooks and crannies all over northern Ontario, and they're just using the traditional medicine, and there's no big pharmaceutical involved. It's just, wow, it's what a contradiction.
Well, they have a team that work at the center called Benojis. It's for young people and children. But the staff there turned it into a traditional medicine place. They made cedar tea with Labrador tea leaves in it, and in jars, and they delivered it to the elders, and that strengthens and boosts the immune system. So you can imagine now we got the CCG establishing the bylaws, the BCRs as we call them here, and then you have the chief and council supporting the CCG from what they've learned from disaster management courses. You have now a team of the tribal medicine individuals that learn the knowledge, know the knowledge, making the medicines and distributing it in the community. Everybody had a part to play. It wasn't just those that got the training and education, people that said, hey, traditional medicines boost the immune system. We added that, and we just went with it, and it benefited everybody because we don't have any cases here.
Wow, that's amazing.
During the time of travesty when so many people lost their lives.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I live 30 minutes from the U.S. border here, and I think people where I live are freaked out if they see a Washington State, California, or Texas license plate. Some of the people here would even get their keys out and key the sides of cars. And then the irony is these American license plate cars, they're actually Canadians who are working down in the U.S. coming back to visit their sick mother or something. So,
but like I said, a person is smart, and a group of people can be dumb, dangerous, panicky animals, So again, it's, that's the society and the reality we live in this world, and we see it every day on the news when we turn on the television.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to be grateful that we're not seriously impacted in Canada because of our due diligence at this time, right?
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into politics here, but I just have to say one thing. With Premier Doug Ford, he... when he came in, he's like, cut this, cut everywhere, and cut the paramedics, I think, cut the hospitals. And then when COVID came, I don't know, he just surprised me. He just jumped on the bandwagon and just, I don't know, maybe he's making a lot of mistakes. I don't know what Ontario people think. But I was surprised because he's not acting like Donald Trump, President of the United States, or some of the Southern governors. He's it looks like taking a little more leadership than I expected.
Yeah, we were kind of thinking the same way because it almost seemed like, to me, when Doug Ford comes out with his decisions first, right? And that authority, because there was no affable sense about his directions of what he was trying to convey. It was very deliberate, and you didn't really sense that from the Prime Minister. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I felt. And it's sad to say that reality had to really probably shake the tree for Doug Ford to say, wow, what a bad time maybe perhaps that I did these cuts, right? But the main thing is that he's doing things now to correct those decisions that were made without the knowledge of COVID ever knowing to hit the world.
Right.
So again, it's a wake-up call to everybody on this globe. It is.
Exactly.
And then prioritizing exactly what is really important now in life. And I can tell you one thing, my priorities have changed after this pandemic.
Oh, exactly. So what are your new priorities? if I
My children, my sons, their safety, family, not working myself to death, and learning to enjoy the little things.
Exactly.
The relationship. So,
Wow.
These things do have a life-changing impact on you. And for me, it's my family it's really opened my eyes to that.
Wow. Now I do know that you've mentioned before that you're a disaster management educator, and I'm just wondering. And you said in LinkedIn, you say you're very passionate about this. So where's this passion from?
Well, our community of Saskatchewan in the James Bay area, it is very known for flooding. And I remember one year as a child, our community being evacuated, and it was my grandparents who were raising me. So we were rushing off to the airport in the reserve to be evacuated to Moosonee and then further south where we would be put up and hosted, the host community. And as I was landing in Moosonee as a child, walking off that plane being evacuated, I remember seeing this man in a uniform. And he was like a conductor. He was telling military pilots what was going to take place. He was talking to the fire teams. You could see this individual was conducting everybody surrounding him that was in other uniforms. And I was astonished. It just grabbed me. It mesmerized me. And I was like, man, look at him. Like, he's even telling police what to do. And I was mesmerized by that. And as I got older, and as I experienced different things in life, and then I said, well, I'm going to try firefighting, not knowing one day that I would be doing what I saw as a child that man doing on that airstrip. And because I know that that's where that passion that clicked from. And not only that, but I've also experienced within our family losses due to disasters. And I believe that's where that passion comes from, that it should not be like that for First Nations.
Right.
Why can't we get the resources that a municipality gets? And I saw that at a very young age, and it bothered me. But it's amazing now, 20 some odd years later, doing that very job that I witnessed as a child, that I now have the leverage with the life skills and the networking that I have established and those willing to work with me to make these changes now and apply them to First Nations who ask for that help. Because you just can't help a First Nations that doesn't want help. And the old expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, in this case, the reality is not every First Nation's on board. It's not until disaster knocks at your door or kicks in your door, that's when you want to catch up. And lately, that's where I've been getting a lot of calls from these First Nations. Help us out. How do we get funding? How do we combat this? We're in dire straits. So as you can see, my plate's been pretty full the last 5 months.
Wow, exactly. But it seems to be a human thing that people just ignore disasters and preparedness until it happens, and then all of a sudden the antennae in their brains they're just like full on. What can we do and to prepare for the next one? It's like.
Yeah. The irony is I see a lot in my job, but do I turn them down at my doorstep when they're in dire needs? No. This is now the chance to get their file done and active, and so that they can work with our networking partners such as Indigenous Service Canada, our federal partners, our municipal and provincial partners. So to me, it's get it done for them, regardless of the lessons they had to get to this point, right, or learn to get to this point. So to me, it's compassion. Help them out regardless.
Right.
And again, that to me is a conviction. That's a conviction call that I have to answer, and I can't turn it down. But that's what's installed in me, right? And that's why this passion is so high.
Okay, wow. Now, for COVID-19, you've had training for that, and then how have you incorporated in the normal firefighting or other emergency management protocol?
Well, number one, if you're a frontline worker watching the monitoring station, we provide you the necessary training skills and to make sure you understand with clarity your duties there. We provide the PPE so that at this time that yes, they are being educated within the community and we're employing within the community while employment is kind of shaky right now globally, right? So it kind of helps out that way. And during the summertime, well, there's no summer jobs for students, but we now educate and train them, the high school students, and they get the chance to work at the front lines with experienced staff, developing life skills, understanding what the monitoring station is now about. Now we have their favor rather than their disgruntled remarks. So now when summer is over, we pull the summer students out. We start putting in the adults that were trained previously and preparing for the second wave that will take place. For my firefighters, it's a little different. We're a little bit more complex because why of the calls that we do on Highway 144. And of course, our MOU with our neighboring community, which means the Memorandum of Understanding. They rely on our services. So here we have to completely go in-depth training with COVID and the policy and procedures involved, which I call our standard operating procedures and guidelines of what firefighters have to follow when they arrive on scene, and then how they have to protect themselves with the measures that we have in place regarding COVID. But we work with our neighboring dispatching 911 offices that give us and feed us information before we arrive on scene, whether that individual has COVID or unknown. And then from that information, we go from there and determine what extra measures we need to put in place to protect ourselves and those that we're trying to aid and assist, and calming any fears for when we come back from the highway, we fully decam with a decam shower. So we're not bringing anything in. And all my firefighters do have a sheet in a form they fill out, which is a self-monitoring system where they take their temperature and they ask those basic questions every day, and they submit those forms in until this is done.
Okay.
As active firefighters.
So you serve some non-Indigenous communities nearby? Is that what you're saying?
There's a neighboring community that is a municipality that we are currently aiding and assisting during their times. I won't get into their politics at this moment, but yes, there are municipalities that do rely on our services as well. We're smack dab in cottage country, so there's a Cottagers Association as well. So, we work fairly with everybody around us as a First Nations and trying to establish a positive relationship, a reconciliation relationship with our non-Indigenous community members surrounding us. And again, that's the best way to build relationships, is sharing what we have.
Okay, wow. Now, can I throw you a curveball? And I met somebody who told me, I think she's from actually Quebec. She told me about in Germany where she had emigrated from. There's this thing from the government. It's an organization called THW. So basically what they do, it's not like emergency social services where you just help volunteers and fill out forms and give blankets and, food vouchers or hotel vouchers. But these are actually different units. And some are trained in electricity, some are trained in detonation, some are trained in debris clearing, others in bridge building, etc. So different units. And they have them all over the country. So when a disaster happens, and they're all volunteers, except for the head people in, I think, Bonn, Germany. So I would look at it as kind of like middle skill range. And then I found out that there's an American group now exists. It's called Team Rubicon. And they basically send people in and they're skilled people. They're not just people who can, that retirees volunteer for form filling.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, and then she was, this person I was talking about is how to get this idea in Canada. Of course, you'd have to get the federal government involved and a lot of taxpayer money. But are there ways to do it here in Canada, on a smaller scale? And I think that you're actually doing it.
Well, if you look at it, we have the DART team in Canada that go to disasters, right? And they work with Red Cross and our Canadian military. We also have MNRF. They go and train certain sectors throughout the region, and they have them prepared and standing by for when they need them. We have disaster and emergency management head offices that deal in coordination of protective services. So they may be called under professionally different entities that are funded by the government, but they do have a branch of finger veins, as I call it, into other First Nations businesses to make it work. And I know for a fact that there are things like the Canadian Rangers in the North, the MNRS, Indigenous Aboriginal Fire Team for Forestry. So what you're talking about is already here. It's just kind of under the umbrella of the professional, federally funded names, right, that we know of.
Okay.
For me, I've never looked at it like that. I just more see it like there's a need, see a need, fill a need. And I never looked at it like that before, so...
Yeah, the reason why some people are looking into it is because they find out in Canada, the military, their purpose is to basically protect the country. And then there was, I think one of the generals way back in January, even before COVID, was saying, we need to save the military for military purposes, not for going from this flood and that wildfire and COVID. And it's, you're throwing the military at everything, but they're not focusing on their main task. So that's why some people are saying we should get the military, not send them in, and have teams of civilian volunteers who are skilled to go in place of the military. So I don't know what you think of that, but
I guess this is where they use the Red Cross. Military is more used for transportation. I know for the DART team that they actually have medical officers that go with their supply. But Red Cross often tags along with them because of transportation issues. And I know for a fact that I've seen them work hand in hand in several places like Haiti with the disaster earthquake and the death toll there. So, I had a few friends work actually with Red Cross in different parts of the world. So, yeah, I do see it happening. And like you said, they are retired, but they still wish to remain active.
Okay.
Myself here, I know for sure when a First Nation hits a brick wall and it's not working well with, trying to communicate with the First Nations, the federal government, there are times I'm sent in to build that bridge of communication to help facilitate the emergency and get things rolling into priorities. So I've done that several times on different occasions in my career. But like I said, with COVID locking everything down, a lot of this work now is being done via, like ourselves, over the cell phone or through Skype or Zoom or whatever they call it nowadays. But that's what I've been noticing a lot, especially in this year.
Okay. Now you have an interest, is it, for developing youth? I think I've seen that on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that you gotta pass the torch. At some time you gotta. And I think that at least giving the youth a touching experience in the courses that we put on for this community, we find out who's interested and who's not. And to this day now, I do see quite a bit of those youth here working and being employed with what's going on here in the pandemic. If it's not in the front lines, it could be in the office helping out in admin. But definitely it was a benefit when this COVID outbreak took place globally, and unfortunately was such tragic loss to life as well.
Right. Now, what would you like settlers to understand about First Nations, and particularly like these small communities that are facing off so many challenges and don't really have the money and resources like the bigger towns have?
Yeah, it always comes back to just that educating oneself. I work with a lot of individuals, whether they're from Canada or the States or internationally. I've met some great people at some of the seminars I spoke at that live in other parts of the world, and this question comes up is cross-cultural training. Right now, the understanding of what we know of First Nations comes to us via social media and the news, and oftentimes it's not depicting the glorious moments of what we have achieved when it comes to reconciliation and transcendence. And I would say for anyone out there that looking into First Nations and why some First Nations are succeeding so well, is that, we've learned what works and what doesn't work. We've had to transcend. And yes, oftentimes, and I can honestly say this for my own career, that I've had to make sure I crossed every T and dot every I. in accuracy, because I know that if I mess up, the forgiveness that I'm looking for won't be there compared to what I've seen where the non-Indigenous are make those mistakes and are easily forgiven. So I know I have to work extra harder to make sure that it meets the measures and criteria of what is being expected. And it's sad because that's the reality. It's not just racism or systemic issues, but we're not just those problematic social problems that we witness, the drugs, the drug addiction, etc., the crime. You know, we have come a long way as First Nations. We are your doctors, your lawyers. We are your instructors in disaster management. We are your fire chiefs. We're your nurses. You know, we're your small businesses. We're your big businesses now. You know, major corporations in some Indigenous First Nations like Soyuz. You know, proud examples that we've transcended and overcome. And unfortunately, because some people just don't want to educate themselves in that, they see the ladder in us, which is really breaks the heart, really. I know my parents came a long way to transcend from their residential school. My sister and myself, you know, had to transcend following our parents' example. Okay. So, you know, we do overcome, and we are making a stand, and it's only a matter of time when you'll see that switch and the change of, and when it does, it'll be a history in the making that, you know, First Nations has what it takes, you know, to stand up with the rest.
Yeah, exactly. And my family doctor's First Nations here in where I live in the suburbs of Vancouver, and it's so funny. His cousin is the one of the top doctor instructors, I think, at University of British Columbia. And that fellow, sorry, I can't remember his name, but he was actually an actor before. He was working with Adam Beach in that Smoke Signals. He was the sidekick in that movie. So it was just like, it's so funny. It's a small world for him, I guess. But it's a matter of, a lot of times it's a matter of opportunity. And now in this, I guess it's always been like this in Canada, but the people who get the good jobs are usually ones when they're younger, their parents or somebody can give them the money for the training, because training is just, it's like, for example, a master's in Canada is averaging 25,000. Like, that's, if you don't have the money, that's a lot of debt to carry for the next 10 years. Yeah. When you could use it to buy a house or something instead of using it for school. But wow. So that's.
I see some of the institutions like in Finland and in Holland, you know, and how that when the students are done there, they don't have debt, you know, and they actually pay them as an incentive to finish their school, you know, and it flourishes there. You know, we got to ask ourselves, what are we doing that's wrong, right? You know, so it doesn't give our young people a very good push start for their futures anyway.
Yeah, no, I was talking to a friend from Bahamas this morning on WhatsApp, and then, you know, a lot of things, there's the protests in the United States with George Floyd, and there's so much happening now all over the world, but I had this theory, and because a lot of people are saying, okay, there's this racism coming from European Canadians or European Americans. I don't like to say white or black. It seems really weird to talk about colors as if you're in a paint store, but it just, yeah, it just seems that a lot of the stuff that comes up is, I was telling my friend, this imperial culture from the British, you know, it wasn't the nice, polite people who left the United Kingdom when they were colonizing the world. A lot of them were opportunistic. A lot of them were pretty rough and tough and rude people, probably. And, you know, it was, anyways, I just want to be polite here, but is there a polite way to say a whole culture? It's just that there's been a culture in Canada, I see it here in Vancouver, where it's just they're rude to everybody, right? And some people think that's racism, but, you know, if they turn out to somebody with their own, that kind of nasty person's same place of origin, same skin, they're still nasty. So it's just like, it's just, right? It's non-compassionate. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, and we witness it from day to day, right? And it's funny because when I'm in civilian clothes, you see the profiling. But when I'm on the highway in an emergency and I'm in my fire gear, they can't jump quickly enough into your arms, right?
Oh my goodness.
So again, it's all perception, right? Because when I take off the gear and they're like, "Oh my God, you're Indigenous Aboriginal," and I'm like, "Well, didn't mind when you reached out to pull you out of the vehicle, did it?" So again, we kind of in a positive way break down those social stereotypes, which is good. And then they see the level of professionalism that we function at on that highway. And that really opened, and I've had some wonderful comments from the OPP and from the ambulance services here saying that's how it should be done on the highway, any highway. So again,
Right.
what they noticed from their previous placements in the city, they see what First Nations doing here on this stretch of highway. So again, it's come a long way though to develop that. And in that process, you're developing and establishing bridges and trusts with non-Indigenous Aboriginals. As I like to say, the colony of the Mayflower, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
again, it's just a matter of educating them and winning their hearts. It takes forever.
Yeah.
In some places, it's a lost battle, but you can't just sit there and cry and give up. You've got to move forward.
And I think it's a matter of educating youth, because honestly, I went to school in the 70s and 80s, and we got like next to nothing about education about First Nations. It was really caricatures, and it was just terrible. And then I think my children going to school, now they've got some really good First Nations education happening in the regular school system. So if the young people can know history and know First Nations people and not get stuff from the YouTube comments and some of the rude stuff on Twitter, then they can know the truth. And once they know the truth, they can have, correct thinking. So.
Well, that's why I invest in our youth. With this career, I just don't invest in the elected officials or the elected emergency team. I also like to say, hey, why don't we do something for the kids in the elementary school? When there's something happening and an evacuation takes place, children and youth sometimes can be left out. But and what I've witnessed and what I've experienced is they are probably one of our best resources and our valuable ones too. There are things that children can do to remind elders, mom, granny, or meds. The kids want to help. The compassion in us to always help when there's something going on. Youth need to be given that chance. Well, oftentimes we say you're too young to understand. But really, if you take the time to teach them and help them understand while they're going through that life experience, they will become a valuable resource when it comes time to come home and go through the recovery phase.
For sure.
So I'd rather have youth that are understanding and contributing to the health of the community rather than ignoring them and not educating them and letting them turn to booze and drugs and dealing their frustrations out that way.
Right.
So it's all about approach. And for me, wherever I go and teach, I always say, hey, throw this course in for the youth. It won't hurt you or the band. If anything, it'll make the elected officials look good.
Exactly, yeah. Now, I'm wondering about climate change. I remember after that conference, I think it was like a month later, I emailed you about what do you think about climate change, and how do you think emergency managers, etc., can like incorporate that into their daily practice. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about adapting to climate change?
Well, climate change, I'm educating myself on this more and more as I hear more professionals and professors speak on it. But it always goes back to is what do the elders say? And if you look at what the elders say and when they describe the land, the rivers, etc., and you compare it to the data that we've collected since the discovery of, let's say, certain rivers or demographics of an area, and if you take a look at the photos, the stories of the elders, and to the data that we have professionally collected through the computer system technology we have today, you will see the vast changes that is confirmed by storytelling of our elders that, yes, something is happening to this world. That, yes, there were no sandbars in this river before. Why is it bone dry now? And there's no dams on this river. Why is there more methane collecting deposits in the swampy territory of Region 9 in the north? I've seen scientists put their instruments out there reading the methane gases. My grandfather said this used to be a field of grass you could walk through. So again, listening to the elder stories and listening to the evidence that's being collected today and the realities of what we're going through today, it makes perfect sense that yes, these two things are tied together. They are a part of a data collection of history, of information that is valuable to us even more now than it will be to our future. So it would be ignorant of me to say, ignore the elders and the history they know, and just only listen to the data that we are getting now through technology. A very unwise move.
Right.
Now I understand why First Nations didn't live so close to rivers, where we now see the beautiful condo communities flooding out. There's a reason why natives didn't put their teepees there.
Exactly. You know, I feel kind of sad for the local First Nations here, because I don't know why, when the settlers came, they're like, hey, let's, these people are using canoes and they're up and down the Fraser River. So let's just give them a community like right down on the river. So when the Fraser River is going to flood in the spring with the freshets, it's like these First Nations, they're like almost ground level to the river. And I'm thinking, well, do they have to build like floating houseboats or something? Like, what do you expect? It's going to flood one day, and it's very precarious. Like, and then I live like way up on the hill here, and it's like, settlers, the government or whatever didn't give some of this great land that's way up here. So it just seems ironic.
Time, right? It was a different era. It was a different time back then. A handshake and your word meant something. You know, when the treaties, as gullible as some of them weren't. They knew what they were getting into. Some of them said, no, we are not selling our land, and it's unceded territory to this day, where the federal government is trying to say, no, we talked to you. Yeah, we talked to us. We didn't agree on anything. So like West Witten, that's unceded territory. That's why they have the conflict they have there now.
Right.
So again, it all comes down to a different time, a different era, where your word meant something, and they were actually living up to what they were doing back in those days for the swap and the trade. Now, as time went on, there was no inflation put on that. Of course, now, we're subject from the Queen to the federal government, the trustee. And apparently now the trustee is trying to change the treaties that were signed, but we're now educating ourselves and our youth on the treaties so we don't forget what was signed and what we're owed. And this is why we're still bottlenecking in the courts, because the federal government knows if he opens up those court cases, they know they will lose land, they will owe money, they will have to answer for the injustices they've committed. So that's my politics on that.
I hope that happens, actually.
10 years.
I hope that happens because
on the field.
because when you look at climate change and a lot of the some places, especially northern Canada, rapid changes with the snow melt, permafrost, and it's like relocation is, I know that people say, oh, I love this land. I love, it's kind of like I fall in love with this, man. But for example, where I live, a lot of First Nations were, springtime, they'd be in one village on one island, and then they'd go to next season, they'd move to another based on the food available. And then, so it was kind of like having 3 cottages and just kind of rotating. And then now you're stuck in one geographic location. But with climate change, you're going to have to relocate maybe, because some of the stuff will be wiped out.
We have polar bears eating in our dumps in Moosonee and Moose Factory.
Whoa.
But you can't say there's no climate change. They should be on ice packs in the north getting fat, not starving off the coastlines of James and Hudson Bay. So we know something. We know something's up. And again, like I said, it all boils down to is just transparency, right? People that have the information and people that need the information. And again, like I said, if you're not getting it from either them or her, the parties involved, does that mean I should stop and not do something at least and prepare my First Nations? Hey, let's make a first emergency response plan. Let's get into a community control group. Let's understand what the essential social services is about. Let's just understand what the flow chart of incident management system is about. Let's educate ourselves while while the outside world is still dealing with its issues.
Exactly.
There's still things we can do, regardless of what's happening out there, and we can still educate and prepare ourselves, because I'm a firm believer chance favors the prepared mind.
Exactly. But do you think some communities, they will need to permanently relocate because of things that are happening?
Well, Saskatchewan's moving further upstream, right? Because they're in the flood zone. So they're moving 34, 37 kilometers upriver. The government wanted to move them outside of Kapuskasing. They said, no, we want our traditional territory. Why? There's a diamond mine there.
Wow.
I don't blame them for not wanting to move off their land. You know what I mean? Sneaky tricks, but our elders are a little wiser than that, right? So again, they themselves have made a route to the location and have already started marking it, saying we're moving here. This is our land, and it is theirs. You know, they're on their treaty land. So if the government's not going to help them, they'll do it themselves, and they've started that road. So.
Wow. Yeah. Now, I'm just wondering, what is your vision for the future, both for yourself, for your career, and the Matagami First Nations, your region?
No. If I could have a fantasy dream, I would love to see an institution on emergency management where we're educating First Nations, giving them degrees, even non-First Nations, but it services Canada and we distribute it internationally. I wish there were like 200 professors like myself to teach students so that, because I see in this day and age, things are going to get worse. I don't believe they're going to get better. And I don't mean that on the scale of civilians. I mean just as the way this planet is talking to us. When COVID hit in the world, the skies over China started to clear. You could see, great distances. We saw how quick the world can heal if you give it a chance. But we're coming out of COVID. We're opening back up. It was a fleeting moment. So to me, things are going to get worse. We're going to see more tornadoes. We're going to see more floods. We're going to see more sheer winds. We're going to see more pandemics. And we're going to rely more on those that are in this field of disaster and emergency management. And the sad thing is you have posers in everything we do in life. And there are some entities out there that are posing as emergency management and don't know squat. Mm-hmm. And they left communities and people in trouble and destitute need. Look at FEMA and those people left in that football stadium.
Yeah.
Because why? They had a plan, but they never tested it. And they never, because you don't test things, you don't do mock disasters, you'll never find the chinks in your armor. So again, for me, based on my knowledge and experience and a profound, humble thank you to those that poured their knowledge into me, I'd love to see an institution, a university here that teaches this stuff located in this area, and to take that knowledge and spread it around.
Wow.
I'd love to see that.
That's, it could be a realistic vision, because it seems like we can't predict even the next year now. Everything is just like, wow, what's going to happen? I look in the news, I use my phone and I look at some of the world news, and there are things that happen every day that I never thought this was possible. It's just,
yeah.
Wow.
Well, like I said, that university, that institution would teach nothing but disaster and emergency management. Nothing but. And we would be pumping out officers of whether they're Indigenous or not out of there. Did you know that our standards in Ontario are so high that when they graduate here, you get job offers to leave Ontario from the States, overseas, etc.
Wow.
Did you know that?
I didn't
know. A lot
know.
of students I went to school with, they work in other parts of the world. They work in other parts of Canada, not in Ontario, because why? The need is so great in this field. And there's a lot of garbage coming out too with emergency management. Garbage that I shake my head at. They complicate the simple wheel, and you should never try to fix something that's working perfectly already. Yes, you can polish it up here and there, but there are some people just totally dismantling the wheel, putting too much technology. What are you going to do when technology shuts down in disaster and emergency management? Where are you then?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people have head knowledge, but not enough have field experience. Because what you learn in the schools is totally different what you'll experience in the field. But yes, some of that knowledge is useful, but you got to sift through it, what's good and what's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 years ago, I didn't know what to do. So I went to one of the local emergency management trainers, and I took, the training program. So spent a lot of money too, this savings. Oh my goodness. And then it came out, and then nobody would hire me. And then I talked to an emergency manager and said, well, you're lacking professional competencies. What does it mean? It just means hands-on. So I signed up for some, non-governmental agencies, signed up for local authority. But again, all I got was like training, a few trainings, but nothing hands-on. So I was like, okay, now I'm found another agency and I want to try out them. It's just like, because you can't just drive your car somewhere and then somebody's going to train you. Here's a machine, learn this. it's like you got to find people willing to give you that hands-on. So as a person wanting to do this, I found it was frustrating.
Yeah. You know, for me in my career, I was just blessed. I happened to work for a tribal council that looked after several communities, and the field was emergency management. It was fresh back in those days. I'm talking about 15, 17, maybe about 15 years ago, Mushkegowuk Tribal Council. Again, it just so happened one year it was state of emergency after state of emergency. And you can go to school and be groomed for greatness. You ever hear that expression? And then sometimes you're just thrust into it. I was thrust into it. I had to learn a lot along the way. And yes, I made my fair share of mistakes. I've hit my fair share of walls and doors, brick walls. I've scratched my fair share of the bottom of the bucket. I've experienced the terminology of what they call a crabs in a bucket, you know, trying to succeed and always getting pulled back in too.
Okay.
But, so like I said, it just so happens that the tribal councils I was working for, they were going through a lot those years, which gave me my experience. I didn't look for it. It happened to unfold in my lap.
Right. Do these First Nation emergency management places, do you think they hire like settlers, non-Indigenous sometimes? Like, do they have a special criteria for that?
It all goes to your networking, right? Like before, have you ever heard of Wilbert Wesley? No, nobody had, you know? But it took, like I said, the life skills, the education, the networking to now where, hey, I have people calling me and saying, oh, I hear that you're the foremost leading expert in this authority. And I'm like, I'm not foremost expert in anything, you know? But to be recognized under that title just shows you how much of your 20 years you've invested of yourself. And now that is building its reputation. And yes, I have worked for many tribal councils. I have worked for other corporations. I've spoken in universities and colleges. But I've never intended it for it to be a pillar of anything. It was just, hey, I'm gaining experience. I've given them an opportunity to speak, you know? But you look back on it now, you realize, hey, this guy carries some weight. And I never knew that until a couple of my heavy teleconference calls I had with some serious hitters in emergency management, where they look to me for the answers or contribute to helping find a solution. So then at that point in my career, I realized, holy cow, I guess that's what it is. And sometimes I fail in acknowledging even that as a gift in itself.
I was interviewing a person named Carrie Ann Charles Norris, and then she's from Lake Simcoe there. Was it Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation? So off of Lake Simcoe. And she was saying that there's all these prophecies, and then there was like this eighth fire. A seventh fire that's already been coming, and then eighth fire. Now, I don't know how metaphorical this is. I don't know where it comes from. But basically, the point of it all was saying that this is the sort of the time of the world and how world history unfolds. And it's going to be where people are going to stop ignoring First Nations people and then go back, use that traditional knowledge and the knowledge of the elders, and even settlers and even people like internationally are going to be looking for answers because they've been ignoring nature for like hundreds of years. And now it's time to turn to the people who have been paying attention to nature all along. So I don't know what you think about that, but I thought it was a little interesting.
I've read in some different articles exactly what you're talking about. There's actually a tribe in the United States, not the Apache, but they have certain prophecies pertaining to what you're speaking of. I have read and dabbled into that. My thought is every era ends. The Roman Empire ended, the Constantine era ended, the Persian Empire ended, the Inca, so again, do you really honestly think this era that we're currently living in now is going to get any better or prolong itself? It's going to cocoon, it's going to change into something eventually. Because obviously the way we're living now on this planet, it will not sustain this forever.
Exactly.
Something will give, something will change. And maybe these prophecies are predicting that change. Because to be honest with you, I don't see this ever becoming a reality in the next 100 years. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Not the way we're destroying the planet. You know, climate change, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, whether we believe in it or not. Point is, if we keep on going the way we are as a society, as a human race, we're not going to... Something's going to snap. Something's going to break. Like the straw on the camel's back. Be sure of that. It's just a matter of time and when.
Right. But how do you give hope to anybody around you and to yourself in all this?
You know what it is? I've been saying it before, and I'll say it again. Chance favors the prepared mind. There are people doing their part to try to change that. You know, you're right. We've invested a lot amount of technology and knowledge and put it into technology. But when technology is removed, what are we back with? We're back digging to what we lost, and that is the traditional basics of what we did as a humanity to survive in the beginning. And yes, and oftentimes, one step forward, two steps forward means often a step back to regain our composure on what is morality and what is right. Because, you know, like Einstein said, inventing the atomic bomb was smart, but was it a smart move? So again, we have to apply that in any facet of life that we come into, right? Maybe the right thing at the time, but in history, was it really the right thing?
Exactly. So do you have one last message for the audience that you'd like to leave ringing in people's ears?
Be compassionate, because when an emergency goes down, there's no racism there. We're all running to help each other. And that's one thing I always see about my firefighters. Regardless of what the call is on and not knowing what to expect, the true compassion rings out in all of us to want to help, to want to do something. Because I believe in all of us, there's a part of us there that cannot stand suffering. That there's a part of us that does cry. And I'm not saying physical tears, but metaphorically speaking, does cry, hurts the soul. That's in all of us, right? And during disasters, major disasters, loss of life, we're going to look to those things, our compassion, the basic things that get us through this. Education is nice. Knowing what to do is nice. But deep down, behind it all, it's going to be compassion. It's going to be love that'll bring us through everything. And we can't lose focus on the simple things that make the world of a difference. Compassion, charity, love. It's in everything that we should be doing. Solves a lot of problems too.
Wow, that's wonderful. I want to just thank you, because I don't want you to lose your voice for the rest of the day. Keep going. But I think, yeah, it's just wonderful. And this is it's rare to get these kind of perspectives. It's not like you can just go on Google and search for it and boom, it's right there in your face. And your voice needs to be heard more, honestly.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity and for this interview, and I really hope it you fulfill what you're trying to bring into fruition, and keep me posted.
Okay, thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
There it is, a very inspiring, insightful, and encouraging interview with Wilbert Wesley, Fire Chief all the way over in Ontario, which is the east part of Canada. Thank you again, Wilbert, for being a wonderful guest here at the Multi-Hazards podcast. So my disclaimer here, which I add to the end of every episode. This podcast is meant to be educational and does not try to offer legal, medical, or other kinds of specialized advice unless otherwise noted. Also, the opinions expressed here in this episode do not necessarily reflect those of the organizations that I work for as host or organizations that guests are part of. So, here as I wrap up this episode, I give you all a special thanks for being here today and tuning in to this episode. And please stay safe out there and stay tuned for more. This is Vin Nelson wishing you the best on your journey of surviving and thriving with all that life throws at you. Cheers to you all. Peace out.